Last speaker this morning, Nicola Stead of PLOS ONE magazine. It's one of the biggest, or perhaps the biggest, open access journal we have seen until now. It's more or less an icon in the field, you might say. And I'm happy that Nicola will explain why that is so and how it came to be that way. Thank you.
Okay, well, hello everyone. I'm Nicola Stead, as mentioned, and I'd like to thank the organisers for inviting me here today to speak to you a bit about PLOS and a little bit about PLOS ONE more specifically. I'm an associate editor on PLOS ONE, so I know it quite well. And basically today I just want to take you over what PLOS's mission is, and then go into a bit more detail about PLOS ONE specifically, and then wrap up with what are the benefits of publishing open access beyond just making your article free to read. So, to start with, I think we need to go back more than 20 years to California, to a lab in Stanford, Patrick O'Brien's lab. And he and his postdoc, Mike Eisen, were beginning to use the first microarrays. And they were looking at the differences in gene expression in yeast cells. And suddenly they found that research had gone from looking at just one gene and how that was regulated to looking at all the genes inside a yeast. And they were faced with this problem that before you could read up on all the literature with one gene. That was something feasible that one person could do. But then they were faced with the literature for all the genes, and they found that that was something that was impossible to do. So thinking about solutions, they thought, well, we could mine the data from the literature. And so they approached their librarians at Stanford University, to sort of work out how they could get access to the data and the literature. And they were told it wasn't possible. Publishers owned copyright, and this meant that they couldn't do what they wanted to do. They couldn't mine the literature that was already out there. This was frustrating for them. And so that set the seed for their thinking. And later on, they teamed up with Harold Varmus, who's a Nobel laureate, who's just resigned from the National Cancer Institute. And he had similar feelings that, people were publishing, but you couldn't get access. You couldn't reuse the literature. It was quite rigid and strict, and publishers owned the copyright, authors didn't own the copyright. And these three are really the founders of PLOS. And along with 34,000 researchers, or more than 34,000 researchers, from over 180 countries, they wrote and submitted an open letter to publishers of scholarly work, encouraging them to make research available through deposition in repositories such as the newly founded PubMed Central. And then in 2001, the trio established PLOS, or Public Library of Sciences, as it was known then, really as an advocacy group to really sort of push this movement forward, sort of, to say, this is something we need to do. However, progress was quite slow. There have been some progress with Biomed Central, was an early publisher for open access, but PLOS felt that it wasn't going fast enough. And so they decided, in addition to the advocacy work that they were doing, to become a publisher, to mainly show that open access works, but also to provide innovative and forward-thinking solutions to removing the barriers to science communication. So, in 2003, they launched PLOS Biology. At the time, it was in print as well as online. PLOS's main vision was to move towards embrace the new online world as well, but this is the first print version with your typical cover image. And at the core of PLOS's principles is to get authors' work into the hands of people who can use it. And very much importantly was the fact that we needed the research to be reusable in ways that we can't imagine yet. I mean, for example, just going back to 1994 when Pat and Mike were thinking they wanted to reuse the literature, no one had envisioned that, you know, when they were writing the papers in the 70s, 60s, 80s even. And so we need to build a framework where we can allow reuse for ways that we can't even think of yet. And to do this, we believe that everything should be made available online without restriction immediately after publication for the benefits of scientists and the public. And for this, we mean that there's no charge to access, there are no embargoes, so the research articles are made available as soon as they're published, and we allow reuse. And so we've heard a bit about the Creative Commons license, and PLOS really believes that this is the best license to use for enabling reuse. And a little bit about it is that, importantly, authors retain the copyright to their work, but they allow reuse. They allow others to share, copy, redistribute their work, allow it to be adapted, and as long as proper attribution is given. And like most journals, I mean, I think sometimes there's a misconception that open access journals are not like traditional journals. They're all indexed in PubMed, and all the PLOS journals are deposited into PubMed Central upon publication and Europe PMC. But you can also deposit your article at any stage during the peer review process on your own website. This can be the one that before you submit it, during submission, just before publication. You can put it onto a preprint server, bioRxiv. We've heard earlier of other places you might want to put your manuscripts. And so that's one of the benefits of open access. Since PLOS Biology was founded, we now have 6 other community journals. So these are quite specific. They're very orientated towards their subject areas, have quite defined scope. But as I mentioned, PLOS really wanted to be innovative and to think of different solutions. And in 2006, or rather probably before 2005, I was thinking, that research really hasn't changed much since it began 300 years old. You do your research, you submit your manuscript, it gets peer-reviewed, and if you're lucky, it gets into a high-impact journal, and then the funding agencies will give you funding because you've got your work in a high-impact journal. But is this the best way forward? There is sometimes a problem with this system, is that not everyone can get into your Nature or Cell or Science, and you can end up stuck in this loop with your manuscripts being submitted, going to peer review, being rejected, having to submit to another journal a little lower down, and you can end up in this sort of journal hopping loop, which A, can take time. It can also be very frustrating. You can sort of have to reformat everything for your different journals. And there's always a question of, where will my article end up? And will I get funding depending on the impact that editors at this journal have decided on? And there's this question of, is this the right way forward? PLOS One sort of thought, well, what if we have post-publication scrutiny? What if it's not the editors or the scope of the journal that is defining the impact of your article, but it's actually your article's impact that you're measuring? And so PLOS One was founded very much with this in mind, that you have the standard research, you submit your manuscript, but rather than having to go somewhere else, most of the work will get accepted after peer review. And then importantly, your article is open access. It has all those benefits of the reuse license, and it's immediately available online, and everyone can read it. And then you introduce a different step, is post-publication impact. So measuring what impact your one article, as opposed to your article as a subset of a journal. And then the funding would depend on your post-publication impact. So PLOS ONE was set up very much in this mind, where we accept research from all areas of science, primary research and medicine, where, importantly, work is not judged on its perceived impact, but whether it's been done to high standards, whether it's been ethical, and is reported well. So that's, again, very much the new sort of editorial criteria: scientifically rigorous, ethical, reported well, conclusions supported by the data. Is it written in understandable English? And importantly, PLOS ONE is also only online, so we're not limited artificially by size. A lot of traditional journals will only be allowed to publish a certain number of manuscripts in one edition, and that artificially limits it, that you have to decide whether or not you can publish something. And we very much feel that everything that deserves to be published will be published. And that's reflected in our acceptance rate of nearly 69%. And by having this different criteria, we are able to provide a home for research that often was not published or neglected. We've heard earlier about publication bias that can occur from just publishing positive research. And we hope that the new criteria allows people to publish negative, null, or inconclusive results. I mean, for example, there's one here, and you can see that it's already got 11 citations. It's quite highly viewed. We also can provide a home for unfashionable results. A lot of the high-tier journals will only publish something that's sexy or new or groundbreaking. And for example, this lab here in Japan published a paper on a specific plant that not many people study. And it's also a great place for replication studies. We've also heard earlier about the fact that a lot of research cannot be reproduced. This is an example of a piece from Nature where Amgen tried to reproduce a lot of the preclinical studies in cancer and found that most of them can't be replicated. But a lot of journals won't accept replication studies. And if you've put time and effort into it, we feel that it deserves to be published. But does this mean that the quality is lower from PLOS ONE? It's a question that gets asked a lot, that it's not peer-reviewed, the quality is lower because we have different criteria, because editors aren't managing scope or judging on impact. And I would say no. We have over 6,000 academic editors who work with PLOS ONE. They're all active researchers, so then a manuscript that gets submitted to PLOS ONE goes to a researcher with the appropriate expertise in your subject area. And these academic editors are named on the published article, so they have accountability. And on average, PLOS ONE manuscripts are reviewed by nearly 2 reviewers, 1.9 reviewers per article. So it is peer-reviewed like other journals. The only difference is that editors and reviewers do not ask how important is the work. Is it relevant for this audience? The audience is everybody. So yes, it is relevant, and we can measure the importance of the work after it's been published. It's very difficult to tell whether it's going to be important until a couple of years or after it's been published. And because we have less of this, deciding is it important, is it not, we have quite a fast decision time of 40 days. But also, before it goes to an academic editor, we have quite high standards in-house. And we have an editorial staff, including 14 in-house editors who all have science backgrounds, who are involved in checking the manuscript. So, as I mentioned before, the standards have to be high. Ethical standards, reporting standards have to be high. And these are all checked before they go to an academic editor. So we ensure that ethics statements are on all our papers. So anything that uses human participants has to be approved by their institutional review board. We also require ethical statements for any work involving animals. We also have additional checks for animal research, making sure that the research that PLOS ONE publishes has been done as humanely as possible. We require that all clinical trials are registered, and we also mandate the use of reporting guidelines for certain subjects and certain research manuscripts. For example, meta-analyses need to adhere to the PRISMA guidelines, clinical trials need to adhere to the CONSORT guidelines, which we really believe improves reporting and can improve replication. It's very important also if you want to do anything like a meta-analysis and you need the information of how many patients were involved. Having the data available and the information available is very important. We also do not accept papers funded by the tobacco industry. And we have very high publication ethics, quite high standards for disclosing finances, funding, competing interests, plagiarism, where we are a member of the Committee on Publication Ethics, and we're a member of the Open Access Scholarly Publishers Association to make sure that we're adhering to the highest standards of research ethics and publication ethics. And it doesn't stop there. Although I mentioned that we mandate some guidelines, we're very encouraging of other guidelines. For example, the ARRIVE guidelines, which is guidelines for better reporting in animal studies, or the Miami proposal, which is for microarray data. We're very encouraging for authors to use these guidelines to improve the reporting in their manuscripts. And as has been mentioned earlier, PLOS has for a long time mandated that data underlying the results of a manuscript be made available. In March 2014, we sort of felt that asking authors to do this wasn't simply enough, and now we require that all authors write a data availability statement. So whilst we've always required that the data underlying a research manuscript is available, we're sort of using that principle of the badges that you saw earlier, that by putting a little statement, on the front of a manuscript clearly indicates where the data is, and it's very easy to see who is making data easily available. So as I mentioned, this is just the data underlying the findings. We don't necessarily require the data from your wider project, and we don't specify where your data needs to be. This could be in a repository. For example, a lot of research fields have their own specific repositories. For example, GEO is quite well known within the genomics, genetic fields. Or you could have a broader repository such as Figshare or Dryad for other types of data that don't necessarily fit. Or the data can be within the supplementary information. For example, data underlying means and standard deviations in a machine-readable format can be uploaded as supplementary information, and our supplementary information is all shared on Figshare. If you want some more information about this, I'm more than happy to talk later, or we have some great pages outlining our policies. And as just to touch back on, we believe that data can be shared in most cases. There are very few instances where it's justifiable to withhold the data. We've heard some of that mentioned earlier. Clinical studies where you have potentially identifiable information would need to be restricted. We encourage, wherever possible, to remove these identifying features and share the data that underlies the rest of the findings without those details. And if that's not possible, to allow access to researchers who meet the requirements for access to confidential information. Other examples, for example, I had a paper the other day where the authors are working on an endangered species of tortoise. And there are very few populations around the world. And we require for reproducibility that authors provide GPS coordinates whenever they're doing field studies. However, in this case, the authors do not want to provide this information, understandably. And so there are instances, for example, where we would allow authors to not share the data in Figshare or as a supplementary file. So I've talked a bit about our different criteria, and now I want to sort of think about the next step of how do you measure or maximize impact after you've published online. So your article is up there, it's free to reuse, then what? So first of all, just by publishing in PLOS ONE, most of our articles get cited quite highly, and PLOS ONE provides high visibility. On average, PLOS ONE articles are cited 9 times, but over about 10% is cited more than 29 times, as you can see by this graph here. There are also other areas in PLOS where we can sort of highlight research. We have PLOS collections, which is a way that you can aggregate interdisciplinary content from different PLOS journals. For example, we just recently launched a collection about negative, null, or inconclusive results. We'll call it the Missing Pieces collection, where you can curate content from PLOS journals. We also have a post-publication platform, commenting platform. This is just an example where someone has asked, what are the next steps? Then the author has then replied, and then the original commenter has also added some more information, so that it's a conversation that happens after an article has been published. And there's a similar commenting system in PubMed. But as also mentioned earlier, research is funded primarily by taxpayers. And another great way of maximizing the reach is by informing the public about the work that you're doing. And a lot of PLOS ONE articles get a lot of attention. This is just an example of one. You can see that this, for example, has had over 200,000 views since it was published in August 2014. And you can see it was in a lot of different national newspapers and Nature. The reuse aspect of your article can allow it to quickly make it into blogs. It's on this well-known site. It's been tweeted about. And for each PLOS ONE article, you have a section here with related content where you can find out all the media coverage an article gets. But it doesn't stop there. And this goes back to the aspect that I was talking about earlier, that making your research available under the CC BY license allows reuse in ways that nobody could have imagined when this movement started. For example, here, this is David Johnston from Duke University, and he decided to set up an online course, a MOOC course, about marine megafauna. And MOOC courses are available to everybody. The general public, students at Duke University, anybody can use these courses to learn more about megafauna. And he decided to only use open access articles in his teaching course, so that the public could actually read the actual research and learn about it at the same time. And he ended up having over 14,000 subscribers to the course. I mean, that's already broadening your research in areas that you might not have imagined. It might end up in a MOOC course. Of course, everyone's heard of Wikipedia, and for example, this article was published on the 19th of May, and then the following day, May the 20th, there was already a Wikimedia page about this new species of monkey, including the images from the actual article. And the speed of the internet is astonishing. And still today, we get this page gets about 2,000 views a month. And this is Daniel Meichen. I apologize for the way I pronounced his name. But he was a winner of the Accelerated Science Award program because he's developed a robot or a bot that automatically scans the web for any images from a CC BY licensed article. And these are automatically deposited in Wikipedia. So your research article, images, or data could be reused through Wikimedia. And these are just all examples of ways that you might not have imagined that your research can be making an impact by filtering through these alternative routes. But it's all very well and good that you have your citations, you have the media usage, you have reusage through Wikimedia or blogs. But the important thing is that we can also measure this impact. And at PLOS, we feel the impact factor of a journal does not reflect impact. We believe that article-level metrics are a more important way to judge how an article is doing. For example, the article I showed earlier of the sliding rocks, you could see that article hadn't had many citations yet. But you could see that it had a very wide impact within the public. It was shared, it was downloaded, whereas other articles might have more citations than they have shares. So it's important to balance all the different areas that you can measure impact. And so, for example, you have the scholarly usage, which is citations, PDF downloads, whether there's comments in PubMed or on the actual article. And then you have the broader impact, which is just important when your research is being funded by taxpayers. And this can be HTML views, whether it's being published in newspapers, online, social network. And basically, you can use ALMs to show what sort of impact your research is having within your field, but also within the broader context of the general public. And this is just an example of that. You have a very small insight into the article-level ALMs for this manuscript here. You can see that it's been saved on something like Mendeley, or here's citations, for example, through Scopus, views, HTML views, PDF views, and sharing. But for each article, you can also go into a bit more detail to see how many of those were HTML views, how many were PDF downloads, how frequently has it been cited according to different websites or citation things such as Scopus. How often has it been saved? How often has it been discussed? And you can break it down into these different aspects of the impact of a journal. We very much believe that there is no one universal number for an article that will give you an idea of its impact, and it is better to think of impact and alternative metrics in a more systematic, separating out scholarly from broad usage. And you can also use your ALMs to create reports for institutions, for specific authors. And this is just a quick overview of what I did for this university here. You can see that we have 36 articles have been published from this university. across the PLOS suite of journals. And you can just visualize the impact that this research is having. This is article usage as a function of the age of the article, and the size of the sphere is an illustration of how many citations it's had. And yellow is PLOS ONE articles, and green as the other journals I talked a little bit about earlier. And you can just visualize how, over time, you can see, obviously, citations and usage increase, but you can see that there are some outliers here, for example, where they're getting much more usage than maybe citations, and you can sort of think, okay, maybe that's through social media, investigate that a little bit more. You can get some interesting diagrams like this to sort of look at article usage by subject area. This is connective tissue specifically. And a visual illustration of where collaborations are happening. Obviously, there's a center here around Eindhoven, but you can see that they're collaborating all over the world and with 117 institutions. So basically, to just summarize what I've just said, is that PLOS ONE is really bypassing the submission-rejection cycle of and journal hopping, as it were, that's created by artificially limiting sizes of issues and judging impact before publication. And we feel that by having different criteria that does not judge work on perceived impact, we can provide a home for important research that is usually difficult to publish. There's negative findings, replication studies, unfashionable work. But at the same time, we maintain high or maybe higher standards of publication and research ethics and reporting. The open access and the CC BY license allows wide reach beyond just making the article free to use. We've also extended this more to data. And then we've created some ways that you can measure post-acceptance impact through ALMs. And on that note, I'll finish and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Nicola. Thank you so much. You already told me you would take half an hour. So it leaves us with plenty of time for some discussion, I guess. Who can I give the mic? I'll start with a question of my own then. Is that right? Yeah? Okay, great. Go ahead.
Yes, hi. My name is Mare Derks. I work at Utrecht University Library. And I work for the development of our own open access journals. And you talked earlier about the high visibility of your journal. And I was wondering, how did you manage to reach such a high visibility to begin with?
Well, I think PLOS ONE is fairly unique in that it was very groundbreaking. When we started, no one else was using these different criteria. And I think we attracted a lot of attention from the very beginning as a new experiment. And with that, we've had incredible success. Since we launched in 2006, we've had 100,000 articles published. And I think because of that, that's why we have high visibility. And then tied in with some of the great success stories that we see, for example, that paper on sliding rocks, the media helps build visibility both publicly and within the scholarly community, yeah, I think.
So you have to be the first one, but that's impossible since you're the first one. The next one, perhaps. Any other questions or remarks? Yes?
Thank you. Can I hold it myself? Okay. Hi, I'm Isabel. I was just wondering, how is PLOS being financed?
So we adopt an APC model, which is an article processing charge. So there is a charge per article that's published in PLOS. And there's a variety of APCs For example, some PLOS Biology has about an APC of about $2,000, whereas PLOS ONE is closer to $1,000, and that depends on the amount of editorial input that goes into the article.
Can I interrupt for a second? This $2,000, is that per accepted article or any submission?
Per accepted article, yes. So
Okay.
it's only charged after acceptance.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, some more? You mentioned that PLOS wants to be a platform for more or less unpopular results as well, like negative results or perhaps some other ways in which things are more or less non-popular. How much of the material would that be on average? Any
Well, that's
idea?
an interesting question. I don't know out of our corpus what percentage of it is falls into those categories. I think it's quite easy to perhaps define what a negative result is, but
Yes.
to define what an unfashionable or unpopular result is a little harder. I mean, I don't know the numbers on either, I'm afraid.
Okay. Yes, please. Can we? What mic was it? Daniel Lakens.
We'll start working. Okay. So yeah, I wondered about the data sharing. So since that's been introduced, can you give some? Oh, sorry. So since the data sharing has been used, can you give some numbers about how many people apply or use it or share data, and how many people don't, and whether it hugely increases the number of available data?
So I don't have any specific numbers, and I'm not specifically involved in the data policy working group. We have a very special group for that. I can say from sort of personal experience, having worked well, I mean, we've always had a data policy, and now we're just making it more visible and policing it a bit more. And I think requiring people to provide a data availability statement has improved the reporting of data. Whether we're there yet 100%, I don't think so. And I think there is still reluctance to share data. And I think part of it is this not knowing where to share data or what to share, or, for example, as you mentioned earlier, that a lot of the data isn't ready because you haven't thought about this in advance, and it's a slowly changing situation, a bit of a chicken and egg case. I don't know about the actual numbers, but it is helping. I can see that more and more people are thinking about where to deposit their data and how to share their data.
Well, it would be nice if there's a number somewhere in the near future, if the team could give a sort of approximate estimate, because I think it shows how easy it is maybe to convince people to share data. Maybe just, something like this, if this would already work, then that's useful information for the field. We can think, okay, this apparently already gets you so far, so let's use that in any case, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, I think our new policy, or updated policy, I should say, was launched in March 2014. So it would definitely be interesting to see a year on.
Yeah, definitely.
Where we stand. And I think there will be differences amongst the journals as well. But
would also be interesting. Yeah.
I would be interested in that data as well. I don't have it.
Right. I can't wait.
More hands? Yes, please. Wait for the mic. From ECN, isn't it?
That's right.
Yes.
From the Energy Research Center of the Netherlands. You were stating that the impact factor is not about impact. Do you actually say that the impact factor is nonsense? Because when impact factor is not impact, then what remains for the publishers is a factor.
Yeah, so the problem with impact factor is first of all, even myself, I don't fully understand how it's worked out. It's based on citations, and it's managed by one company who creates this number, and it's very unreproducible. So, for example, as a journal, you can't even necessarily work out what your impact factor is going to be when it's released. And because you can't see, because it's not transparent, it's very hard to understand what is being taken into account. And this is why we feel that it doesn't truly represent impact. And very much the impact factor is based purely on citations. And as we're seeing our environment change with the role the internet has, social media has, and the idea very much more that research that's funded by the taxpayers should be made available to taxpayers. There are different ways that your research can have impact, and we feel that that is not represented in the impact factor. Therefore, we feel that it doesn't necessarily represent the impact of your article especially. It represents the impact, perceived impact of one journal, and it's not representative.
I understand you don't believe in the impact factor, but I'm sure you've checked what the impact factor would be if you believed in it. So PLOS ONE, what's the impact factor in the traditional sense? Can you tell us?
Well, we do keep track of the impact factor because in a scholarly environment, people do still care about the impact factor, and it is still used when making decisions of where you want to publish.
Yeah.
And we know that we're above 3. I don't know the specific impact point decimal impact factor.
Above, I'm sorry?
Above 3.
3. Okay. Yeah. And perhaps Gus can help me out. Science and nature, how much is that?
I have no clue.
No? Anyone? What's the impact factor of science, for instance?
I think
26?
Yeah,
over
I was going
20?
to say about.
Okay, but that's the exception to the rule, you might say. And we shouldn't believe a word of what it says.
Yes.
Okay,
yeah, I
but
think they're around sort of science, nature, cell are around about between 20 to 30.
Yes.
It can vary year on year, but like someone mentioned, that they're really the exception.
Let's ask the audience a question. How much does the impact factor of a journal matter in the decision to submit a paper somewhere? Would you say it's important? Who says it's important? No one? You don't look at the impact factors? I don't believe you.
I don't want to say anything, but I believe that it is important because it shows how seriously your research is taken. And primarily, I don't oppose to the idea of open access or PLOS ONE.
Yeah.
But when I want to submit my research somewhere, I want my audience to know that it is a serious work and it has been judged by a very good journal. So it helps me decide which journal to send my article to. And also, in many cases, it is a requirement of many universities, maybe not in the Netherlands, but they say if you want to have a PhD, so you have to have a ISI index paper or highly reputable journal publications before you can graduate even.
Yes. So in practice, it matters. Yeah. Yes. Yes? Perhaps I can already see some more hands, so I can tell where to go.
I'm in a different case. We are in mathematics, and we are always envious of biologists and chemists who manage to publish things within a week. You write an article and it's immediately there, while in mathematics, the reviewing process might take 2 years.
Yes.
My feeling is, personally, that in my area, the impact factor is not very important. Our journals, the best of them, have an impact factor of 1.3.
Okay.
Because an impact factor is a function of the citations that you get within 5 years, but it already takes us 2 years to actually get the article there, in which case we have already improved the article, and research has happened further because we have actually presented it in conferences, which explains why our area has a very low impact factor. So the opinion we've just heard might be very dependent on the area. In my area, my feeling is that there is a vague feeling of reputation of the journal. I can easily rank the journals in my area, and I have no idea how this correlates to their actual impact factor, as in that number.
Okay. Yes, please, Daniel.
I think I will. Yeah, all right. I think this is an interesting question about the prestige, that we as scientists give to a journal like Science. And just as one example, which is probably pretty rare, but we are working on this huge replication project, which is basically done. Where 100 labs have replicated 100 studies, there are about 400 co-authors, and it's been a project for 3 years, and it's now done. They're writing up the results, and if you have a project like this, you can basically go shopping for any publisher that you want. So at this moment, you don't submit something to Science, but you just, I don't know how they do it, but you send them an email and say, hey, can we arrange something? And they will say, well, they can count that they will get more than 30 citations in 2 years. So they understand that if they take it, it will be good for their impact factor. So that's a very rare situation. And I asked all these hundreds of people, I said, so where should we submit this? Because we know we can get this in Science. That's not an issue. So maybe we should be very clear about what we think as a field is important and give up on all this nonsense about these impact factors. And then they put it to a vote. And from the 100 people who voted, 2 people, I was one of them, said we shouldn't send it to Science. And the major reason why people said we should still send it to Science is exactly because of the prestige. So this project would be taken more seriously if it ended up in Science, even though purely rationally we can pick where we will send it. So we can send it to Science, we cannot send it to Science, Science will take it. It's not an issue. So I don't really understand why we're still having this sort of prestige, which we are doing. And let's be very honest, first of all, people probably hype their research more if it ends in Science than not. There's a correlation between the amount of retractions and the impact factor of a journal. So higher impact factor have more retractions because there's, people are pushing the boundaries of what's acceptable to get into these journals. So that's all a little silly, and that's all stuff that we do. I mean, I think the psychology behind these kind of decisions is immensely interesting. And maybe we should think a little bit more about it. I think that considering a journal like PLOS or alternatives is something we should seriously consider to sort of cut through this part of nonsense, which should not be part of Science. So, yeah.
So perhaps you should take the paper to PLOS ONE, for instance?
Well, we are a democratic project as you go with 100 people. So, yeah, I mean, I tried. At least I put it on the agenda and we had a vote. And I mean, that the majority decides differently. At least some people thought about it, I guess. But it's an important thing to, well, let's start about thinking about it, but maybe change our behavior in the future as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very important that this is a process that's taken up by the community. It's not something that will change overnight, using a different way to measure impact and moving away from the impact factor. And a lot of publishers actually have signed the DORA declaration, which signs up to the principle that we should not be using impact factors as much, moving away to finding alternative article level metrics. But it's not something that's going to change overnight, and impact factors will, I think, still continue to play a role.
How about question?
Not a question, but just I want to add to that. Yes. Perhaps it's a little known fact that the Dutch Association of Universities, the VSNU, has also signed the DORA declaration last December. So that right now all Dutch universities are saying we agree that we shouldn't use the impact factor anymore to assess our scholars. So if you as a scholar say, well, I'm forced to do this because the universities are judging me on that, it's not true anymore.
Or perhaps it's true, but they're saying something else. That could be the case as well, yes. Yes.
But wasn't the case in my recent NWO grant application that the last section asked me if I would like to report the impact factors of the journals where I published?
Okay, perhaps we can have a reply from NWO then. It seems to still play a role in grant applications. Okay, could you stand up, please?
In grant applications, we look at two. We have several criteria. But one is the capacity of the researcher or the research group, and the other one is the research proposal we judge. So when you want to have an idea of what is the past performance of a researcher, you look into their track record. And part of the track record is also what they did on publication records, also what they did on previous research and so on, but also on publications. Mm-hmm. But we do not, and that was a little bit a comment I would like to mend. I think you should change a little bit your first slides, because having a science or a nature publication doesn't mean that we fund your proposal. We fund a combination of a good researcher with a brilliant plan. And so we look, but we are not we are very aware of all discussions of publication pressure, having a lot of publications in your research, and then only be able to get funding. We in a lot of our funding schemes, we are not asking for complete publication list anymore. We are trying to give reduction to the very best publications or the most representative publications, so that we do not have this long list. We're also very aware of that, especially for female researchers, they have some maternity leaves and so on, so that we have to take care of that they will not, in 5 years' time, they are not able to do the same number of research as the male colleagues could. So we try to do this, but it is still a topic. And what I think also is very troublesome is that organizations like Web of Science produce this H-index. H-index is also a kind of indicator, and everybody looks at H-indexes. I was just looking at the Scopus for the impact factors of the journals, and they have also published the H-index for the journals.
The Hirsch index.
Hirsch index, yes. Hirsch index is a very dangerous indicator because Hirsch index depends on the research fields and Hirsch index depends on your age. So how can you compare? You will never have to compare proposals from researchers on the same age and from the same field. That never will happen. So using the Hirsch index is very dangerous. You know, you can better use other indexes to give, like the bibliometrics in Leiden. They have some indexes which I trust much more. But Hirsch index, which is easy to get from Web of Science, that is dangerous. It is a number that is also dangerous. Numbers give you a feeling of that's true, but this is not a good number. And we should be careful of using this. And what I tell my committee members always is that you have to combine information from the proposal. You cannot just look at the number of publications or Nature publications or whatever. You have to combine everything, and when there is some discrepancy, think of it. What is happening here? Or when it comes together, then also you have to be aware, is this, but you cannot just judge on the number of publications or the number of publications in high impact journals. We never do it.
Okay. So publications in PLOS ONE, for instance, are just as good in that sense.
Yes, when the field acknowledges that that is a good science project, that, I have to be honest. When I compare PLOS ONE, I saw it is 3.2 in the computational biology, and I compare it to Nature. I think that the community would say that this Nature publication would have a much higher impact. But you are telling us about that you should not only restrict yourself to a very maybe old-fashioned or traditional way of looking into what is impact and how it is used. You say, look also in internet uses, social media and other examples, but because that is much broader spread, and we have to think of it. Publishers have to think of this because the world is changing and we are walking a little bit behind. My children are much more used to use whatever, Instagram, WhatsApp, and every week they have a new system of having communication. And we are still working with a paper tradition. And that is something we have to develop.
Yeah. Okay, let's get to that point. The PLOS magazines are all only on the internet now, isn't it?
Yes.
Is there any paper left?
No, PLOS Biology launched on paper to sort of fit in with a more traditional way of publishing. To
connect to the real world.
But since then, everything is online, 100%.
Okay, so, and it's all fully available. So
yeah, all PLOS journals are published under the CC BY license online, available as soon as they're published.
Okay. You showed us some examples of high-ranking papers in that sense, that they had hugely amount of page views, for instance. But on average, what would that be for a PLOS paper?
I have no idea, actually, for an average.
Any ballpark estimates?
No, I wouldn't want to. I mean,
because 200,000 is quite a lot, of course.
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult because it also depends on age, and in part, seeing that altmetrics sort of visualization, you can see as time goes on, your usage, which will include page views, does increase.
Yes.
And so I don't know if you sort of took a time point, what the average across the PLOS ONE scopus would be.
Yes.
Corpus, sorry.
You showed us some metrics on individual articles. I understand they're fully automated and added to the actual paper.
Yes, I mean it's updated constantly. So if you look at your paper on Monday, and then there's a press article on Tuesday, it's probably increased by Wednesday. So it's constantly changing the metrics.
Yes, and would you say it's a tool for policies in the PLOS office as well? Do you tend to try to get a high impact in that sense? That in social media, for instance, you can, of course, rolling stones in a desert is very interesting to the general public in the broad sense, and perhaps other studies are just as important, but more or less limited.
Yes, I mean, obviously, some of the examples that I chose today are very interesting, and you know that they're going to become picked up by the press.
Well, you mentioned sexy for nature and science, but this inevitably is sexy as well.
So we do have a press team at PLOS who are responsible for enabling press releases, and for example, the sliding stones was one of those. But we're also really interested in at the moment, we have a regular blog where we look at unusual article level metrics for papers that aren't perhaps seen as, you know, media or sexy, because we do see that there is sharing that might go on that isn't explained by the citations or vice versa. It's quite interesting to see different types of articles being used in different ways. So for example, one paper might have a lot of citations but not be shared a lot on Twitter. Or other articles that even aren't press released might get shared a lot on Twitter or Facebook or other social media. And it is something that we're interested in, and we're always looking into the different life stories that manuscripts can take that aren't purely based on citations or social media.
Yes. Okay. Yeah?
It's NISO, the standardization organization, is working on a standard for altmetrics. Do you think that has a chance to come in place of the impact factor?
Yeah, I think at the moment there are a lot of...
I'm not sure I quite understand the question. Could you translate or perhaps repeat it?
Well, my understanding of the question is about standardization of different article level metrics and whether we will approach one ALM.
Yes.
Is it that? Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, for example, as I've demonstrated today, PLOS has their own article level metrics, and you've probably maybe heard of another company called Altmetrics, who also provide article level metrics. And I think we are seeing that there's differences. For example, Altmetrics is very much going down the route of having one number associated with an article. And I think it is going to be difficult having some sort of standardization because PLOS doesn't believe in having one number, as we feel that probably will just replace the impact factor. I mean, it goes talking about the H index as well. I think we need to understand that you can't measure any one article or researcher by one single number, and that you need to take everything into account. And because we're sort of seeing these divergences already in article level metrics, ALMs, I'm not sure where we will end up on that front. So at the moment, it's not necessarily standardized.
Okay, any last questions? No one, okay. Well, thank you again, Nicola Stead, of course, for your excellent presentation.